And now, a story from the Appleseed.
So as I've traveled to many places, particularly in Western African countries when we go into villages, and often when there's storytelling, at some point in the story, everybody who's gathered, and I mean there's elders, there's babies, there's toddlers, there's everybody who gathers, they will join in, whether it's a song or a chant in the story. So this song was going to be easy to learn. I'm not even going to teach it to you. You'll hear me sing the line, and I'll motion for you to join me. I am told that there is a village, a Shona village in Zimbabwe, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where children hold a place of high honor because long ago, children came together with love and with courage to save a dying chief. There was once a young man by the name of Babacar who lived in a village at the foot of a mountain. Often he would play at the foot of that mountain with his friends, but one day he was playing alone when he heard an alarming cry. He followed the sound. It led him through a grove of trees into a clearing. On the other side of the clearing was a bush. On the bush was a hunter's net, and caught in the net was a small but struggling python. The python caught Babacar's eye and called out to him, "Help me, release me from this net. I have medicine that can help you if you are sick or you're ill." Babacar thought, python and men did not always dwell well together. But he had an empathy for all living things. He broke a branch from a tree, pulled off the leaves, sharpened the end on a rock, and began to cut the net and set the python free. Again, the python spoke. It thanked Babacar and said, again, if you are in need, if you are sick, if you are ill, sing my song, Nyangara Chena. Nyangara, come out, and I will come. And the two parted ways. Well, time passed, and Babacar grew into manhood. And a day came when the chief of his village lay sick unto death. The men of the council gathered together to choose a successor, and when they emerged, it was Babacar whom they had chosen. They saw how he grew from being a child to being a man. They took note of his empathy for all living things, how he spoke to people with kindness and empathy. They also noted his strength and his courage. Well, on the night before he was to become chief, Babacar took a walk at the foot of the mountain where he had played as a child, absorbed in thought, thinking of the life that had been part of his past and the life that was now to be his future. And he was so absorbed in thought, he wasn't looking where he was stepping, and twisted his foot on a rock and lay writhing in pain when he remembered the promise of the python of his youth. And he began to sing the python song, Nyangara Chena, Nyangara Chena, Nyangara Chena, Nyang. And sure enough, over the top of the mountain and down came Nyangara, longer, thicker, and stronger than he had been in Babacar's youth, coiled his body around Babacar's foot, moved his tongue back and forth from his heel to his toe. And the pain began to subside, and he put weight on it and stood, and the two spoke again and parted ways. Well, Babacar did become chief, and it is said that he ruled with a wiseness and a fairness that had not been seen in many a year. But a day came, well before he was in his elder years, when he lay sick. He gathered around him the men of the council and said, "You must go to the mountain of Nyangara. You must bring Nyangara down. He has medicine that can help me. Take with you this calabash of water so he might drink from it on this hot day." And he taught the men the song of the python, and the men began to assemble one behind the other, with the first one carrying the calabash of water. And they began to walk towards the mountain of Nyangara, climbed the mountain, stood before his cave, and began to sing his song. Nyangara Chena, Nyangara Chena, Nyangara Chena, Nyangara began to uncoil himself once, twice, 3 times, began to climb up the back of the last man, over his head and down his face, up the back of the one in front, over his head and down his face, and he began to stretch himself out on the shoulders of the men. They began to feel the weight of Nyangara. Their fear overtook them. They dropped the calabash and ran back down the mountain. Well, the women, upon seeing this, said, "We will go to the mountain of Nyangara. We will bring Nyangara down to save our dying chief." So the women began to assemble one behind the other, with the first one carrying the calabash of water. They began to walk towards the mountain of Nyangara, climbed the mountain, stood before his cave, and began to sing his song. Nyangara chena, Nyangara chena, Nyangara chena. Nyangara began to uncoil himself once, twice, 3 times, began to climb up the back of the last woman, over her head and down her face, up the back of the one in front, over her head and down her face. And he began to stretch himself out on the shoulders of the women. They too began to feel the weight of Nyangara. Their fear overtook them. They dropped the calabash and ran back down the mountain. Well, the villagers entered the hut of Babakar and stood around his pallet and watched as the color began to leave his face. And the children who had sat at his feet, listening to him tell the stories of his life, listening to him tell the stories that helped them to live theirs, said, "We will go to the mountain of Nyangara. We will bring Nyangara down to save our dying chief, but we will sing to let Nyangara know why it is we are coming. We will sing to give ourselves courage." So the children began to assemble one behind the other, with the first one carrying the calabash of water. And right outside the hut of Babakar, the children began to sing the Python song. Nyangara chena, Nyangara chena. Na wenyangaru tazukuwa Nyangara. Na wenyangaru mambo wedu Nyangara, Nyangara chena, The children climbed the mountain of Nyangara, stood before his cave, and sang their song stronger. Nyangara tazukuwa Nyangara. Na wenyangaru mambo wedu Nyangara, Nyangara chena. Nyangara began to uncoil himself once, twice, 3 times, began to climb up the back of the last child, over her head and down her face, up the back of the one in front, over his head and down his face. And he began to stretch himself out on the shoulders of the children. They too began to feel the weight of Nyangara. They sang their song stronger. Nyang, na wenyangaru tazukuwa Nyangara. Na wenyangaru mambo wedu Nyangara, Nyangara chena. Nyangara dipped his head into the calabash of water, and down the mountain came the children with Nyangara on their shoulders, singing their song. Nyang, na wenyangaru tazukuwa Nyangara. Na wenyangaru mambo wedu Nyangara, Nyangara chena. Nyangara slithered off the shoulders of the children, slid inside of the hut of Babakar, coiled his body around Babakar's body, moved his tongue back and forth from his head to his toe. And the color began to return to his face. And he sat up on wobbly legs, sat up and stood on wobbly legs, walked outside of his hut, and there before him was every child in the village. And one by one, he held each of them to him in a tight embrace, but told them, Nyangara cannot remain here among the land of men. You must see him safely back to his cave. And so once again, the children began to assemble one behind the other, with the first one carrying the calabash of water, and began to sing the song of the python. Nyangara, na winyangaru tazukuo nyangara. Na winyangaru mambu eduo fanyangara. Nyangara chena. Nyangara slid off the shoulders of the children, slid back inside of his cave, coiled his body back up. And when the children saw that he was safely inside, they dropped that calabash and ran all the way back down that mountain. But from that day to this, the children of that village hold a place of high honor because so long ago, children came together with love and with courage to save their dying chief.
Thanks for joining us for a story from the Appleseed.